Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection,
If I can control your mind!
or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do.
Then I can control your will!
An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels.
If I can control your will!
This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly.
Then I can control your desires!
As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government
If I can control your desires!
and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects,
I can control your destiny!
such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere.
If I can control your mind! Then I can control your desires!
On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain
If I can control your desires!
regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations.
I can control your destiny!
Others might seize on SAI's benefits and back away from their commitment to carbon dioxide reductions. And as with other breakthrough technologies, global norms and standards are lacking to guide the deployment and implementation of SAI and other geoengineering initiatives. Now, I could go on and on and on and on about the things that fascinate me, but rather than talk about them, I thought I'd stop here.
Look at each other!
It has been shown that our emotions have a vibratory frequency to them. Furthermore, there are only two emotions that humankind experiences: fear and love. All other emotions branch either directly or indirectly from these two emotions. Fear has a long and slow frequency vibration to it, while love has a very rapid and high frequency. To show that vibration is the very foundation of existence, Hans Jenny developed what is known as cymatics in the 1940s to show that when vibrations of sound are passed through a form of media, there is a set pattern that will follow. When the frequency increases, the media develops into a more complex pattern. This is precisely what is happening to our Earth and to humanity. There are 64 possible codes of amino acids in our DNA structure made from 4 elements: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. By any means of logic, we should have all 64 codes activated within our DNA structure. Yet we presently only have 20 active codes.
And of these 64 possibilities, it appears that only 20 of these codes are turned on right now for us, the 20 amino acids. There is a switch that turns off and turns on where those coding sites lie, and that the switch for that turning off and turning on is what we call emotion. And this is the first time that we've ever seen the patterns of emotion directly physically linked to human genetic material. Well, fear is a long, slow wave of emotion. So this wave of fear is a long, slow wave and touches relatively few sites on this DNA. So an individual living in fear is limited to the number of antennae that they have available to them, whereas an individual living in the pattern of love. This is love in DNA. You can see it's a higher frequency, shorter wavelength. We have many more potential sites for coding along that genetic pattern.
In 1927, at the 5th Solvay Conference on Physics in Brussels, Belgium, a new proposal of mind over matter was admitted to try to resolve inexplicable behaviors on quantum mechanics. With the greatest minds in physics attending, such as Einstein, Pauli, Dirac, Bohr, Heisenberg, Curie, de Broglie, Schrödinger, just to name a few, the subject of consciousness and the atomic world was at hand. Heisenberg and Bohr approached Einstein with a new theory that the minds of the researchers were affecting the results of the experiments. The mathematics of predictability were not repeatable and reliable enough to explain what was happening. Einstein could not accept this at first because it violated all mathematical models. Years later, he admitted it was happening. Einstein said, "Anyone who becomes seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that there is a spirit manifest in the laws of the universe, a spirit vastly superior to that of man." A spirit is not a mechanical force like gravity, electromagnetism, or the strong and the weak forces. A spirit is consciousness. So for Einstein to have made this great transformation can only mean that something convinced him that it was really happening.
Tonight's talk is consciousness, creativity, and the brain. If you have a golf ball size consciousness, when you read a book, you'll have a golf ball size understanding. When you look out, a golf ball size awareness. And when you wake up in the morning, a golf ball size wakefulness. But if you could expand that consciousness, then you read the book, more understanding. You look out, more awareness. And when you wake up, more wakefulness. It's consciousness. And there's an ocean of pure, vibrant consciousness inside each one of us. And it's right at the source and base of mind, right at the source of thought, and it's also at the source of all matter.
There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter.
The solidity of the world seems totally indisputable. As a fixed thing that you can see and touch, your body is also reassuringly solid. But beginning with Einstein, modern physics has assured us that this solidity is a mirage.
All of physical matter, everything we have around us, is the result of a frequency. And what that also means is that if you amplify the frequency, the structure of the matter will change.
Sound is the factor which holds it together. Sound is the basis of form and shape. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. We are told that this is how the world began and how creation took shape. If we put that into the modern idiom, we say that into the great voids of space came a sound, and matter took shape.
The definition of an organism is any living thing capable of response to stimuli, reproduction, growth and development, and maintenance of homeostasis as a stable whole. Our universe does all of these things. The consciousness of our universe is responsible for the form and purpose that all matter assumes. These frequencies are responsible for biological rhythms, such as menstrual and circadian cycles, as well as behavioral and emotional patterns. The frequencies are then picked up by the flora and fauna, which are biological instruments that respond to the wave patterns. The wave patterns resonate in the cranial structure of our head and converge in the center of our brain, which is where we find the pineal gland.
Fluoride.
The pineal gland is believed in many cultures to be the spiritual third eye responsible for intuition.
Fluoride.
Descartes called it the seat of the soul where mind and body meet. Each individual cell in our body receives an electromagnetic impulse from our central nervous system.
Fluoride.
They receive the very same impulse that was disseminated to every biological instrument from the earth. An explanation of our conscious universe has been attempted by religion, science, and philosophy.
Fluoride.
The neglect of biological nature from any organism causes illness.
Fluoride.
A divorce from nature, exile from Eden, confounding of tongues, they are all symptoms, not of a biblical God or deity, but the true self. The greatest and only threat to ourselves is a loss of self, the death of our divinity.
Fluoride.
As we barrel through history with oceans of information, yet barely a drop of wisdom, we have to understand how we lost ourself.
Fluoride.
Fluoride and the pineal gland. It is now known, thanks to the meticulous research of Dr. Jennifer Luke from the University of Surrey in England, that the pineal gland is the primary target of fluoride accumulation within the body. The soft tissue of the adult pineal gland contains more fluoride than any other soft tissue in the body, a level of fluoride capable of inhibiting enzymes.
Quantum physics has revealed what ancient masters knew. Matter does not exist. The concept of substance arose from the philosophy of Aristotle. And from that concept came science's conception of matter. The fact of the matter is that the substance of the universe is consciousness. Belief that the substance of the universe is matter leads to what I call a fear-greed dichotomy. As people in their quiet desperation attempt to accumulate as many material possessions and riches as possible. In fact, the substance of the universe is consciousness. Therefore, it is behavior that is important.
If I can control your mind, then I can control your will. If I can control your will, then I can control your desires. If I can control your desires, I can control your destiny. Look at each other. Look at each other.
The life we perceive with our five senses is not reality. Quantum physics has shown that space and time are illusions of perception. Therefore, our bodies cannot truly be a reality if they occupy this space. Our true consciousness does not exist in our brains or in our bodies. But this illusion of our individual bodies, along with the misinformation of our true origins, has manifested the idea that we all think independently from one another. Within this understanding, it would seem impossible to scientifically explain telepathy, clairvoyance, spiritual mediums, and other phenomena dealing with transferring information between sources without physical means of communication. But when you understand that there is a common spiritual bond between all things in the universe, and that we are all part of one divine intelligence, no phenomena is unexplainable. The blank matter within the most basic building blocks of perceivable existence is malleable and molded by intent.
What is the physics of consciousness? We can ask that question today. What is consciousness? Where does it come from? What are the origins of consciousness? What are the limits of human potential? We're in a position to actually answer that now, I believe, although there's certainly not consensus yet in the scientific community about that. But with the real cutting-edge knowledge, the discovery of the unified field, the so-called superstring field, we now understand that life is fundamentally one. That unity at the basis of mind and matter is consciousness, universal consciousness. It's the very core of nature. We call it the unified field. Now that we have that foundational understanding of what consciousness is, we can solve the mind-body problem. We can see how consciousness percolates up through our physiology to become the consciousness that we experience and see, and sensory perception, and all of that has been exploring deeper levels of natural law. From the macroscopic to the microscopic, from the molecular to the atomic to the nuclear to subnuclear levels of nature's functioning. What we've discovered at the core basis of the universe, the foundation of the universe, is a single universal field of intelligence, a field which unites gravity with electromagnetism, light, with radioactivity, with the nuclear force, so that all the forces of nature and all the so-called particles of nature, quarks, leptons, protons, neutrons, are now understood to be one. They're all just different ripples on a single ocean of existence. That's called the unified field or superstring field. We have realized Einstein's dream. He dedicated half of his life to discovering this unified field, and now in the context of the superstring, that has been achieved. A single universal field of intelligence, an ocean of existence, at the basis of everything, mind and matter. And all the so-called particles of the universe, the forces in our universe, everything in the universe are just ripples on that ocean of existence. We're all just waves of vibration of this underlying unified superstring field. We are really united at our core. And ultimately the understanding that's emerging will be that there is only one consciousness in this room. Quantum mechanics, even at the molecular level, let alone atomic, nuclear, subnuclear, In the realm of quantum mechanics, the idea of particle is replaced by the idea of wave function. And what is a wave function? Technically, it's a vector in a linear space. But what's a vector in a linear space? What's it made of? What's the substance of nature? Well, a wave function, a vector in a linear space, is made of the same stuff thoughts are made of. We're really living in a thought universe, a conceptual universe.
This is a hologram. Holograms have little in common with traditional photographs, except that both use film. Holograms can create completely three-dimensional pictures, and every piece of the film can reconstruct the entire image. In order to understand holography, you have to understand something about waves. When waves meet, their effects are additive. When two crests meet, we get an increased effect. But when crest meets trough, their effects cancel out.
Plato wrote, "This world is indeed a living being, endowed with a soul and intelligence, a single visible living entity containing all other living entities, which by their nature are all related." In an article out of the Sufi journal, the author writes, "The world is a living spiritual being." This was understood by the ancient philosophers and the alchemists who referred to the spiritual essence of the world as the anima mundi, the soul of the world.
It starts with a 1, the next number is a 1, then after that, to get the next number, you'll always add the two numbers that came before that. So 1 and 1 is 2, 1 and 2 is 3, 2 and 3 is 5, 3 and 5 is 8, so on and so forth.
There's a conspiracy to hide this information that DNA is a Fibonacci exemplification of this number or entity ratio sequence called the golden ratio.
So it turns out that this sequence of numbers has all kinds of applications. It describes all kinds of things in the world that we see around us.
And when it's so obviously everywhere in nature, it has to be a conspiracy in the satanic New World Order Illuminati system we live in. I guess they don't want you to know this stuff.
When it comes to the origin of life, there are only two possibilities: creation or spontaneous generation. There is no third way. Spontaneous generation was disproved 100 years ago, but that leads us to only one other conclusion, that of supernatural creation. We can't follow the evidence wherever it leads if it leads us outside the natural realm, to a metaphysical realm, to a supernatural realm. We have to stay within this naturalistic, materialistic box. This in 1954, and the idea here is that science will ultimately answer all of these questions, but the last thing that we want to do is jump into some kind of philosophical or theological explanation. How does matter become mind? It doesn't. Mind must bring forth matter. It's that in all areas of study, mind must bring forth information, matter, etc. Matter never brings forth mind. Think about that.
DNA is a very powerful, massive information storage system. In fact, DNA that makes up our genes actually is like books of information that's read by a language system. It's absolutely phenomenal. And scientists know today that languages, a code, only come from an intelligence, and information only comes from information. Nobody's ever seen matter by itself give rise to a code. Nobody's ever seen matter by itself give rise to information.
DNA is a three-dimensional molecule that is self-replicating. Each molecule is able to make an identical copy quickly and efficiently. The Lord has even programmed DNA to detect and correct replication errors. These sophisticated capabilities far exceed man's means.
God has created the DNA molecule in such a way that it is self-correcting. There are special proteins called enzymes that go up and down the DNA molecule looking for and making repairs on a minute-by-minute, second-by-second basis.
They gave us the history of that civilization which came here before man existed. They were mining
gold from Africa because they needed the gold in the atmosphere of their planet that moved around. They got tired of that working, so they wanted some sort of robots or something to come in, so they engaged in some genetic engineering with the indigenous primates. Genetic engineering.
All that we perceive with our five senses is a result of two fundamental principles. Everything in existence is made of a relationship between vibration and matter. Vibration is a masculine creative force countered by matter, which is a feminine receptive force. Thus begins the principle of duality. We see this duality in ancient myths and philosophies, yet only those philosophies and scriptures that were perverted and raped of the original meaning gave the impression that one polarity was good while the other was evil. The original sages, adepts, and shamans taught that both are necessary, and one would not exist without the other. These two important principles come together to form all things in the universe. This is Kymatica. Even language, logos, the communication of any and all things in nature, depends upon this principle. Pete Peterson, in his works Cymatics, The Science of the Future, nature shows examples of Kymatica in everything. This phenomena is found to be one of the prime forces that moves biological evolution along its path. Dan Winter reproduced an experiment to prove that the ancient languages of Hebrew and Sanskrit, when spoken, create a vibratory frequency that moved matter into sacred geometrical patterns. In Swami Murugesu's The Science of Mantra, he claimed that when a person chanted specific words in Sanskrit while filming a burning candle, the intensity as well as the color of the flame would change due to the frequency that the word would emit. This same science has been shown to lower and raise blood pressure. This rediscovered knowledge of the science of sound shows that sound is something more than mere vibratory signals. Not only does sound interact with life, but it sustains and develops it.
Nobody knows. Go to the university and go ask your physicists, go ask your chemists, go ask them and say this. Say, how do these crazy things called quantum particles, which act so strangely, compose the next stage up the chain? How do they compose an atom? And then ask, how does an atom compose a molecule? And how does a molecule compose a chemical? And they're going to say, we don't have any idea. Now they'll probably get out their Tinker Toys and draw you or sculpt you a picture of an atom and say, this is how the atom is structured, and it gives rise to the molecule, and some molecule in question. And you say, no, Professor, how does one compose the other? I didn't ask you to show me a representation that you think is true about the one, about the atom, and then just say, oh, it composes the next stage up, the molecule. You say, Professor, I want you to show me how it works. Tell me what is involved. Guide me through the process. And that professor is going to say, we don't know how it works. We can't.
It acts as a conduit of conscious intent between people, societies, and entire civilizations. Yet the psychic illness we endure due to the domination of our false ego is reflected in the collective. Our psychological schism has shut us off from communicating correctly with our inner self, which is exactly how cancer cells within the body operate. In the collective, we have created a language barrier between humanity and the rest of nature, acting as a global cancer. Recorded in history, the efficacy of the ancient languages has been severely uprooted. The alphanumeric translation from Hebrew to English shows a complete reversal of the two languages, giving the cymatic effect unnatural results. Dr. Leonard Horowitz stated in his work on DNA, 1/3 of the sensory motor cortex of the brain is devoted to the tongue, oral cavity, the lips, and speech. In other words, oral frequency emissions spoken or sung exert powerful control over life and even evolution of the species. A degradation of language in this case is shown to affect biology. If something as basic and important as language can be degraded and devalued to such a degree, yet never questioned, what else might we be missing?
The overview that I had was to bring to light to the mainstream a lot of ideas that have been shelved over the years by organized religion, because I think one thing that organized religion has in common is that it wants people to be subservient and not to think for themselves.
Within the last 2,000 years, well, we could go back to Mesopotamia, which is where evidently all of our civilizations began, and we could look at things that were happening there 250,000 years ago. And what was happening there were civilizations. What was happening there was buildings that sometimes had buildings that were 80 stories tall.
On this planet?
On this planet. How come we're not taught that in school? Well, I don't know why you're not taught that in school. The source for this, we now can read those ancient tablets from the people of Sumer. That was where the cradle of civilization came from the Sumerian language. All of the languages on the earth really dovetail right into it. Civilizations rose and fell and rose and fell, and now we know that there was a civilization here that was composed of those that did not come from Earth. But they were talking about this. What I think some of the more interesting things that they said, that they gave us the history of that civilization, which came here before man existed. They were mining gold from Africa, just in some genetic engineering with the indigenous primates, and made the workers. And
what is the literary source for this fascinating information?
Yes, the literary source for this is the ancient Sumerian text. Now, these old boys were either science fiction writers that make Gene Roddenberry look like he was not even in kindergarten yet, or they were historians. The ancient Sumerian text. Genetic engineering made the workers.
Think of an aspect of your life that dictates the limits of your freedom. Government and law enforcement, insurance and pharmaceutical companies, taxes, building permits, driver's licenses, and more. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of stipulations, regulations, and boundaries on our freedom. And out of the ones that were just mentioned, how many have you researched to find out whether they apply to you or not? Through the manipulation of language, this Admiralty law changed the meaning of the word person from a natural living person to a corporation.
Genetic engineering and made the workers.
What else might we be missing?
Everything else is intact and here to see. So Abraham would have grown up looking at this cigarette his whole life. He would have been aware of this, all of this stuff. So it's an interesting, this is where all of everything, all his like Semite history and pre-Semite history goes on. This is where all religion is born on planet Earth, and our military has conquered it.
Mesopotamia, it means the land between two rivers, Euphrates and Tigris rivers. Euphrates and Tigris meeting together to the south of this city near Basra. They called that city Gurne, and they thought their garden of Eden and also their big tree, they called it Adam tree. The name of this ancient site, Ur, 2 letters, U-R, and in the Bible they call it another name, Ur of the Chaldeans. Ur in that time, capital of the Sumerians. The civilizations in Iraq, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian. So this is the capital of the Sumerian. Sumerian started here before 4,000 years BC. But Sumerian civilization important because the oldest civilization, and Sumerian putting the basis of many things in the world, like the beginning of the writing. The first letters of the writing in the world started during the time of the Sumerian, and the kind of that writing called iconographic writing. The beginning of the writing like pictures. After that developed it and called it cuneiform. After that 50 years came another writing in Egypt called hieroglyphic writing. In this city also started the invention of the wheel. In addition to that, also in this place, home of Prophet Abraham. Prophet Abraham recognized by Christians, Muslims, and Jewish and other religions as father of the prophets. It means father of the religions.
And typically where lines cross, where you have more than one line intersecting, temples were often built.
These are called conductivity discontinuities, which sounds highly technical, but it's merely the place where one area of ground that has a good ability to conduct electricity meets another area of ground that has a lesser ability to conduct these natural electric currents.
The Chinese had the same tradition. They call them dragon lines.
They don't want, I guess they don't want you to know this stuff. It has to be a conspiracy in the satanic New World Order Illuminati system we live in. Because you might realize that this reality you live in is charged with Yahweh. The architect's fingerprint is absolutely everywhere, and it's in you. You are a piece of that fingerprint. the golden ratio, the ratio that proves the existence of intelligent design, or the reality of intelligent design of the cosmos. I mean, if you go to the golden ratio site for Wikipedia too on the same theme, they don't mention any of this stuff in nature that we're going to talk about. They talk about how it's found in architecture and math and all this kind of stuff. They don't discuss it how it's found in the measurements of the human arm. Why not? Here's another piece to add to this. Why isn't this in our education system? We learn all this junk geometry, pea-brain stuff when you take geometry in high school, and they don't teach you about any of this? The golden ratio everywhere in nature? It's just, I mean, well, I think I'm making, that's the point here. I think that just made sense to me, thinking this through as I say it to you. It has to be a conspiracy. How could all this be overlooked, and how could Wikipedia leave it out? There has to be somehow that big money has pushed their influence, because you might realize that this reality you live in is charged with Yahweh. And hey, you might realize that your consciousness is also, and that there's no joke in saying you're created in God's image, and you can therefore take part in the power in creation.
Remember that you are a natural human being of the earth. You are not governed by anything but your own consciousness. In all forms of the perversion of language, there is a mirror reflection of this in the microcosm of the psyche.
And the problem I see with humanity today is we don't truly know ourselves anymore. We have the 9-to-5 job, we have the house, the children, the bills, the television, the hobbies, and the errands that we run every single day, and we eventually begin to believe that this is who we are. You know, but who are we beneath the job title, beneath the status of mother or father, theist or atheist, Republican or Democrat, black or white, man or woman? Who are we? Who are we deep down inside? We don't know, because every time we hear an answer that we don't want to accept about ourselves, we deny it. We'll pass it off and project it onto somebody else and judge them for it. This is repression. And we see what repression can do to us on an individual level, but what about on a collective level of humanity? What happens when the whole world refuses to see what they truly are on the inside?
The ancient Sumerian text. Now, these old boys were either science fiction writers that make Gene Roddenberry look like he was not even in kindergarten yet, or they were historians. Genetic engineering and made the workers.
Look, this is exactly what I was trying to explain to you when I was trying to explain it to you. Like the huge epiphany I had, the whole big picture of it all right? We're living in a hologram, okay? In this day and age, we don't do what God wants us to do. Like, we really don't, all right? Every murder that's done, blood is spilling on the soil, okay? Everything that goes wrong, right? It all attaches itself within this hologram. Now, what did the hologram do? What did the guy do in the picture of the hologram? He cut it. He cut it. And then what happened? It didn't matter how many times he cut it or how small or whatever, dude. It was all stuck in the hologram, right? So all this negative stuff, as well as the positive stuff, it's all still contaminating our hologram, dude. This is what sin is. That's sin. You understand? It's like diseasing the hologram. I was thinking, like, how do we clean the hologram, dude? You know? Like, is there any hope? You know? The hologram's so big, it's so vast, it's like, and people don't even understand the conception and the understanding of what I'm talking about. So they're not even going to care. But, dude, seriously, I thought about it. Yeshua is the eraser for the hologram. He is the eraser. Think about it.
The mind is deep like a lake. The ripples on the surface represent the conscious mind, the activity of the mind on the surface. And the whole depth of the lake is silent. And that is the subconscious mind, which is not used by the waves. But if the waves could deepen and incorporate more silent levels of the water, the waves could become the waves of the ocean, the mighty waves. This is what happens in transcendental meditation. The surface activity of the conscious mind deepens and incorporates within its fold the depth of the subconscious. And with practice, nothing remains subconscious. The whole subconscious becomes conscious, and a man starts using full potential of the mind.
Here are two random sources of waves, not of equal amplitude or frequency. If we make a time exposure of their shadows, the image is completely washed out because nothing remains in place. Here are two pure wave sources of equal amplitude and frequency. Notice the areas of motion and calm in the water. A time exposure looks like this. As long as the frequency and amplitude of the two sources are constant, an interference pattern will be formed wherever they cross. These two speakers send out pure sound waves of identical frequency and amplitude. The microphone records areas of calm and motion. If we could see the three-dimensional interference pattern caused by the two sound sources, it would look like this. Light also travels in waves. What happens when two light beams cross? Interference of light waves should produce bands of light and dark, but we see none. In general, when two white light beams cross, no visible interference pattern is produced. A red filter will help to make the light monochromatic. Even this highly filtered light, however, is not monochromatic enough to produce a noticeable interference pattern. Let's examine the light source. While our water and sound waves are in step with one another, the light bulb produces light of many wavelengths, which are not in step with one another. This is the inside of a laser, a source of intense and spectrally pure light. The laser emits light waves more monochromatic than any filtered light source. We will use a laser to check for interference by passing its light through this optical device, which splits the beam in two. The interference should appear as bands of light and dark.
All right. So, question one: what is your opinion of the war on terror and the 9/11 terrorist attacks? Your opinion
About it.
The war on terror.
I thought it was very sad.
You thought it was very sad?
Sad the way it happened.
Do you think there's a lot more?
I believe there's a lot going on that we don't know about.
Okay. Do you think it was really terrorist, or do you think it was maybe possibly an inside job?
I think it's both.
You think it's both? Do you believe that 9/11 was an inside job?
Yes.
Do you agree with the Patriot Act being approved without consensual vote from the American people?
Yes.
Do you have a claimed religious status?
Yes.
What is it?
Baptist, Christian.
Christian? Do you read the Bible often?
No.
A claimed religious status.
So I have a clean religious
Acclaimed. Yep. Like Christian, Buddha, Jews, you know.
Well, I have a little mixture.
A little eclectic.
You know, like Baptist.
Okay.
You know, holiness. You know, I've been
Okay.
all there. Mhm.
Right on. How often do you read the Bible?
How often?
Yeah.
Not as often as I should.
Okay. What do you think of President Barack Obama?
Should be fired.
What is your take and opinion on Fukushima?
I don't know who that is.
If you could rate your love for money on a scale from 1 to 10, what number would you pick to represent your love for money?
8.
What do you think of the FEMA concentration camp conspiracies?
Not sure about it. I don't know. Don't know much about it.
What do you think about President Obama? Barack Obama.
I don't like how things are going. Just put it that way.
Okay. Any kind of like example?
I mean, I know he's tried some ways.
What do you think about him flip-flopping on the NDAA bill that just got passed? Which is with him basically spying on people through the NSA and saying that it's, you know, we need to do this to basically stop terrorists. Also, he's got a secret kill list of American people. Do you know anything about it, though?
No, I don't know
Okay.
nothing about that part.
What is your take on Fukushima?
What is that?
Okay. Here, 11 questions, all right? There's no right or wrong answer, and the answer only needs to be as complex as you want them to be. Do you believe that 9/11 was an inside job?
To an extent, yeah.
If you could rate your love for money on a scale from 1 to 10, what number would you pick to represent your love for money?
Probably about an 8.
What do you think about the FEMA internment camp conspiracies?
I don't know very much about them.
Do you have an opinion of Fukushima?
What exactly is that?
All right, what is your opinion of the war on terror and the 9/11 terrorist attacks?
War on terror. Well, it's more like an excuse, really, to just be over there. And
Okay.
Kind of just figure out how we can get our hands on that oil. That's
So
really-
you don't believe that it was a real terrorist attack?
I don't know about it. I think it was an attack, but I think that was just kind of our scapegoat to be able to go over there and have an excuse as to why we're there.
So, in a nutshell, what you're trying to say is that you think it was our own government?
Not necessarily that.
Do you have a claimed religious status?
I don't claim
No.
any religion.
Do you read the Bible often?
No.
Okay.
Not once.
Do you have an interest of the American politics?
No.
No?
Not really.
Then, okay, so let's go ahead and say this right here, okay? Let's say politics involve your money, your beliefs, and the people. And then the moment you take yourself out, you just give them control of your beliefs and your money. If you could rate your love for money on a scale from 1 to 10, what number would you pick to represent your love for money?
10.
As our biological details evolve, so did our social development, and it is during this time that the earliest forms of hierarchy begin to take place, that we discover the importance of symbols and the interpretations of this early form of writing. It is in early Mesopotamia that we see the first highly intellectual societies become more advanced and flourished. When groups would settle and begin farming, this would begin a community where ideas could be expressed and the earliest forms of spirituality and religion began. Fertile Crescent, also known as the cradle of civilization, contains evidence of the first communities known to man and is considered by many to be the starting point of modern evolution in history. The living planet was something they felt quite an attachment to, which also gave them everything they needed to continue survival. Things like lakes and rivers, trees, plants, animals, the sun, moon, and stars were held in high regard. These people thought that there was something truly magical about the elements. This formed what many would consider to be the earliest source where the belief in animism took root. Animism is the belief that all things found on Earth contain energy, or a soul, and that all things on the planet are connected and dependent on one another.
The human body is a community of approximately 50 trillion cells. Everything the body does, the cell does as well. Cells have respiratory and excretory systems. They feed, feel, think, and communicate with other cells. Trillions of cells make up a single organism called the human body, and billions of human bodies help make up the organism we call Earth. Every one of us has the capability to commit the most horrifying sin, or show the most beautiful compassion to our fellow man. This is the very definition of an illness within the psyche and soul of man. Think of any position of power that you believe to be above you. Royal families, government leaders, the United Nations, financial organizations, corporate monopolies, and media juggernauts. These are all facets of our false ego. They are the physical advent of our own sickness. They require our conscious participation, our conscious energy to survive. Because without our cooperation, without supplying them with the sustenance of complicity, they starve. Their very nature depends on our desire to be ruled. And a typical symptom of the illness among humanity today is our continuous denial of our illness, repression. We consistently repress those qualities we choose not to accept about ourselves. This is why it is so difficult to see the false ego and its multiple manifestations for what they truly are. This acts as a red herring to distract us from the freedom we truly have. For this psychic parasite to survive, it must supply us with a chemical that will cause us to remain dependent upon it. In this case, the sustenance is our conscious energy, and in order for us to feed it to the parasite, the chemical of fear causes humanity to crave protection and defense.
Author Robert M. Stanley.
According to what I've discovered, based on the work of Carlos Castaneda's, which apparently was based on Toltec warrior teachings from God knows when, there are these a type of parasite that it looks like an amoeba to me. I think he called them the flyers. And it turns out that these things are insinuating themselves into our consciousness and causing us to have negative emotions and to do negative things to each other and ourselves solely for the purpose of feeding off of that negative energy that is generated in the process. I thought that there were individuals among us who were being possessed by demonic entities from another dimension or a higher frequency beyond our vision. But it turns out, according to what Castaneda's wrote, that these beings were basically our greatest nemesis, that they had a collective consciousness that was using us sort of like the way we use cattle, and that they were provoking us and getting into our minds. Let's just call it in the conscious mind, we separated between the conscious and the subconscious. Well, what if our conscious mind has actually been hijacked by these entities? If we're talking about by soul, if you mean the energy field around us, or perhaps that is primarily the motivating force for who we are, our consciousness, let's say, then yes, I would agree that there is something, or maybe some group of things that are actually feeding off of this. Now, when I look back at the archives on this, the history is a little unclear because the word archon shows up in so many different parts of our history. I mean, for example, in Greek, it just means lord or ruler. The Gnostics, who were considered, there was a specific branch that were considered pagan, and they apparently had more ability to see into these other dimensions or higher frequencies of consciousness.
In all of the cultures, they have talked of as, quote, evil spirits.
Yes. Well, I mean, let's focus on Central America. Who do you think was influencing the leaders to commit human sacrifice? Who were they sacrificing human lives to?
The sailors and Marines who will not only lead that fight, but who will lead our country for decades to come. And on Monday, we celebrate Memorial Day. It's also a day on which we set aside some time on our own or with our families to honor and remember all the men and women who have given their lives in service to this country we love. They gave America the most precious thing they had, the last full measure of devotion. And because they did, we are who we are today, free and prosperous nation, the greatest in the world. The service and sacrifice of our men and women in uniform isn't always readily apparent. The service and sacrifice isn't always readily apparent. It's also because those who serve tend to do so quietly. They risk their lives, and many give their lives for something larger than themselves. That's been true throughout our history, from our earliest days when a tiny band of revolutionaries stood up to an empire, to our 9/11 generation, which continues to serve and sacrifice today, And because of that courage, that willingness to fight and even die, America endures. That is the purpose of Memorial Day.
I mean, isn't this exactly the scenario that we're discussing here? Is that, I mean, what generates more fear and anguish in a human being than being, ritually slaughtered for the gods? You know, that clearly shows to me that these archons have been around, and they're still around. They're still around. You know, this.
The functions of the body to survive can be broken down to two basic functions for any organism to survive. You have to be able to grow, maintain yourself, take care of your biology, but you also must be able to protect yourself, so that if you're just growing and you can't protect yourself, you'll become food for something else. So the survival involves a balance between growth and protection. Through the history of human civilization and through human evolution, we recognize that our nature is to be in a state of growth, and that our protection is only supposed to be used to help us out of that threatening moment. You can't be in growth and in protection at the same time. So the significance is, when we see a need of protection, the stress hormones in the body shut off the blood vessels in our viscera or gut, which is the part of the body for growth. Well, the issue is, if you took the blood from the viscera and moved it out to the arms, then you left no blood in the viscera. That means no growth, but you're ready to fight. And when your fighting is finished, then the blood returns back to the viscera and you grow again. But in the world that we live in today, it's 24/7 fear. So we have a continuous dripping of that stress hormone into the body. It's just dripping all the time, getting us ready to run or fight or flight at any moment. At the drop of a hat, we're ready to go because we're on guard. Well, the problem is, what does that mean about your allocation of energy? And it says, we're spending most of our energy in protection. You cannot survive if you're in protection all the time.
And if the parasite can control the nature of the fear, it can then create a fear among us that only it can defend us against. A recent physical manifestation of this comes from Zbigniew Brzezinski, former Secretary of State who also supported President Barack Obama. In his book, The Grand Chessboard, he states, as America becomes an increasingly multicultural society, it may find it more difficult to fashion a consensus of foreign policy issues, except in the circumstance of a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. Even the Reichsfuhrer of the Nazi Party, Hermann Göring, sums up this game of supply and demand perfectly when he stated, "The people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders." That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the peacemakers for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. Evolution is a term to define only one organism. Nothing goes through an evolutionary process alone or without direct benefit to the whole. So when you begin to think that there's this controlling elite, this controlling hand behind the curtains leading the planet to destruction, when you think the end is near, the apocalypse, Armageddon, and when you think we as a species are doomed, it is not they, it is you that brought this about.
In the previous lecture, we saw the possibility, and in my opinion, the probability, of a tremendous deception in history of how Roman Catholicism and the Jesuit order managed to disappear underground in terms of its political capacity, and then to resurface later as though nothing had happened in between. But of course, the entire stage for the final conflict on this planet was set during that period. So it was a major, major move and a brilliant strategy on their part. Now, one thing is to set up the infrastructure, but if you want to win against Jesus Christ, if you want to defeat Jesus Christ, as is their aim, then the only way you can do it with God, because God is invincible, is to cause great pain to him by depriving him of his children. To see a deception which alienates his children from him. It's a very, very subtle and deliberate process. Now, the Bible says that in this great conflict that we will have, eventually all of mankind will wander after the beast. But that word wander is written with an O and not with an A. Wander after the beast implies cognition. In other words, this war is not so much a physical war, which it also is, as it is a battle for the mind.
480,000 school buses carry over 50 million students to public school each year. Of the 50 million students, 35 million of them are 4 years old, attending pre-kindergarten. For 14 years, our children are taught and raised by federal government employees. America spends more than any country in the world on education. Taxpayers dish out over $634 billion every year for public schools, and we are ranked 14th in the world. Why is America doing so poorly in education? What are our children being taught? And more importantly, who runs America's public school system?
Because it is in the mind where the decision is made whether you belong to Jesus Christ or whether you belong to another force. That's where the battle takes place. In the process, you may die. In the process, you may end up on the stake. In the process, many things can happen. Nations can rise, nations can fall, wars can come. All of these things can happen. But do not fear those who can destroy the body. You must rather fear the one who can destroy the entire body, soul, spirit in the final conflict. And the devil wants mankind to be destroyed. And the only way that he can achieve it is by changing their mindset. So this has always been a battle for the mind. And we learned in the last lecture that the Jesuit order created all the school systems, which eventually became the school systems of the entire world. And they introduced learning against learning.
School spending has tripled over the past 40 years. We now spend much more than other countries, but what do we get? Fancier schools, more assistant principals, but student learning? No improvement. Look at it. There's the line. For 40 years, scores have been flat. Much more money, no improvement. This is awful.
It's time to come together to get it done.
When it comes to education, we are not a collection of states competing against one another. We're a single nation competing against the world.
Satan is angry because he wants to be God. It tells us in the book of Ezekiel, verse chapter 28, that Lucifer rebelled against God. And in Isaiah chapter 14, it tells us the 5 things called the I will. So Satan, I will. Basically said, I will be like the Most High. Satan wants God's job. And so because we are made in the image of God, and because he can't do anything to God, he comes after us. We're made in his image. So it's no different than people like when Saddam Hussein was toppled. They threw shoes at his statue. Well, that doesn't hurt the statue any, but the statue represented Saddam Hussein, and so since that was made in his image, they got angry at the statue. This is common tactic, and because we are made in God's image, Satan hates God, and therefore he takes it out on us, because he can't do anything to God.
In 1879, Wilhelm Wundt, the father of psychology, decided that man had no soul. Man was just a stimulus response animal with no self-determinism. He needed to be trained like any other animal. Supply the correct stimulus, you get the correct response, just like rats or dogs. In the early 1900s, Teachers College taught teachers the new science of psychology. These new methods of teaching would devalue academics and concentrate on behavioral techniques to mold children's values. Schools would be turned into mini psych clinics. The Rockefeller Foundation backed Teachers College and new educators like Edward Lee Thorndike, James Earl Russell, and John Dewey, who were disciples of Wundt. Together they rewrote textbooks and curriculum for the new American education system. They hired professional educators that believed history and geography were unnecessary burdens on young minds. Children should concentrate more on how they feel about history rather than memorizing unnecessary facts. And most importantly, the teachers and counselors should be the ones to teach moral values to the children, not the children's own parents. Parents were not professionals. 1965, passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. The number of educational psychologists in schools rise from 455 in 1969 to 16,146 in 1992. Probably just coincidentally, the number of child murderers and suicides skyrocketed as well. Certain members of the government were overjoyed with this new form of education. Controlling the behavior of people, keeping them dumb, they could pass any laws they wanted and no one would even know.
This system gives whoever is in control of the state the opportunity to mold the character of the children to their values. Whether it's Mother Teresa or Adolf Hitler is immaterial. Neither Mother Teresa nor Adolf Hitler should have the right to mold every child in the state to their particular value system. That's the role of the families in the state. Doesn't matter whether you're liberal or conservative. It's a civil rights issue, you're right. Behavior modification is not liberal or conservative. It changes children to the state-desired response, and whoever controls the state controls the response.
Hitler said, let me control the textbooks, I'll control the state. Free education for all in public schools. That was Karl Marx's idea.
There was a man named Karl Marx. Marx got an idea. His idea was that the workers of the world should unite and rise up to counter an evil foe. That foe being capitalism. Capitalism. The idea that people and private companies should be able to own the means of production and be free to earn and have as much as they wished was anathema to Marx. Marx felt the state should own the means of production, as well as products produced, and then the state should distribute a fair share of all such products to each and every worker. Thus, in his book, The Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx thundered, "Workers of the world, unite!" Marx looked forward to eventually taking over the world. Unfortunately, when World War I broke out, the workers of the world did not unite. Some years after Marx failed, several of his disciples got a new idea on how to take over the world.
Our public school system. Arthur Keith said evolution is unproved and unprovable. We believe it because the only alternative is special creation, and that is unthinkable. The Bible says they did not like to retain God in their knowledge. For this cause, God shall send them strong delusion. Anybody that believes they evolved from a rock 4.6 billion years ago, I would say is strongly deluded. You would have to have help to be that dumb. You could not do it on your own. You'd have to have years of training and conditioning to believe such a silly idea.
If there's one question we all want the answer to, it's where did we come from? Primordial soup. That's what we're talking about.
Is it possible for a person to go insane? I mean, absolutely loony? Oh yeah, it happens, doesn't it? Okay. Is it possible for an entire group of people to go insane? Can you imagine over 900 people drinking poison Kool-Aid and killing themselves? A whole group went insane. Is it possible for an entire nation to go insane? You know, like millions and millions of people go just plain old nuts? Oh, it's happened, folks. Hey, is it possible for the entire world to go insane?
This is one of the rarest books in the world. This little book right here, really delicate. It's done in 1782. This is the first Bible ever printed in English in America. They printed 10,000 of them. There's 22 left in private hands. This is one of them. So, one of the rarest books in the world. What's cool is this Bible, the Bible of the Revolution, was printed by the Congress of the United States. So Congress printed the first English language Bible. They said in Congress that this Bible is, quote, a neat edition of the Holy Scriptures for the use of our schools, end quote. So the Founding Fathers in Congress printed the first Bible in English, and they did it for the use of schools? I didn't think they wanted the Bible in schools. That's what we hear. That's what we've been told. The Bible was put in schools back in 1647, back in 1647, back in 1647, first public school law. We kept it in schools till 1963 when the court said, yeah, we done. At 320 years, let's do something different. And now we're told the Founding Fathers never wanted the Bible in schools. That one piece of history right there proves exactly the opposite.
And the devil wants mankind to be destroyed. And the only way that he can achieve it is by changing their mindset, where the two mindsets could clash. On the one hand, you had the Protestant mindset, which said that the Bible is the standard of all righteousness and should be the basis of all schooling. And on the other hand, you had Gnosticism. Man is the center of everything, and man is the one who has to be exalted to the level of deity.
Upon what criterion could citizens agree that it was necessary to go to war? Surely a nation full of citizens with no common values would be confused. They may be totally free, but their confusion will make them short-lived, if not barbaric. That's why the American experiment is so important. That's why the rudiments that made America happen must be preserved. For if these factors are dropped out, you get a cruel, chaotic, and revengeful society. Such a society will eventually occupy its time with pleasure-seeking hedonism, material acquisition, and violence-oriented pastimes. Hey, welcome to today's United States. No surprise, the baby boomers are in charge now.
So that is emulating the voice of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Now, the greatest strategy to win the mind over that the Jesuits used was Jesuit theater, Jesuit drama. Now, if we look it up in the Encyclopedia Britannica, it tells us Jesuit drama, program of theater, developed for educational and propagandist purposes in the colleges of the Society of Jesus during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. By the mid-17th century, there were 300 Jesuit colleges in Europe, and in almost every one, at least one play was given each year. And it seems as though a little college here is doing something and a little college there is doing something. But they are far more brilliant than that. Embedded in ratio studiorum, rational studies, were the elements of entertainment, dramatic production, composition, rhetoric, eloquence. And these courses interlinked with the spiritual exercises. So here was something to control the mind. Ignatian way of thinking, taking you into a supernatural form of religion, experiential religion, where experience becomes the norm. The feelings dictate, but the mind is bypassed. So they introduced spiritual exercises in the most subtle way to intensify the experience of Catholic doctrine over Scripture and Protestantism. Jesuit priest Athanasius Kircher then added something to this theater. And what he invented was the megaphone. And then he invented broadcasting. So he is the father of the modern technology that we see right here in our midst today. Camera theater And he perfected what was called the magic lantern, lanterna magica. So this was the origin of the modern cinema. Now, if you're a major strategist, you don't want anyone to know that you are pulling the strings. So you are always behind the scenes, and you will have your front men. And the front men that they introduce, of course, are the Jews. They love using the Jews and term it Zionism. But these are papal court Jews. These are not Jews in the sense as we would understand from the Bible. So knowing and obeying Scripture is not necessary in comprehending the ways of good and evil. And this is what the devil said in Eden. Now, after World War II, during September 1957, Pope John the 23rd gave Jesuit theatre a broader horizon with his encyclical Miranda Prorsus. And this is what he wrote. Men must be brought into closer communion with one another. They must become socially minded. Have you heard of social doctrine? Their technical arts, cinema, sound, broadcasting, and television can achieve this aim far more easily than the printed word. The Catholic Church is keenly desirous that these means be converted to the spreading and advancement of everything that can be truly called good. I want to remind you that in the occult world, in the esoteric world, good becomes evil and evil becomes good. So if somebody says something is good, you could in your mind just twist it around and say evil must triumph. It's a move to embrace all of humanity. That means all of humanity must receive the same mindset. It is the church's birthright to use, please note, to use and own the press, the cinema, the radio, television, and others of like nature. That must include the internet.
The United States has undergone a cultural, moral, and religious revolution. And a militant secularism has arisen in this country. It's always had a hold on the intellectual and academic elites. But in the 1960s, it captured the young in the universities and the colleges, and we had this great battle, cultural war begin then nationally. And since then, if you will, secularism has really achieved dominance in the academic community and the intellectual community and the entertainment community in Hollywood, among part of the political community, but not the nation as a whole. However, it is much stronger than it was, and so this is the basis of the great cultural war we're undergoing right now. And this militant, it is an anti-Christian, anti-God, anti-traditionalist revolution. It's partly the sexual revolution has a lot to do with it and how people live. And so we are two countries now. We are two countries morally and socially and culturally and theologically, and cultural wars do not lend themselves to peaceful coexistence. The truth is that while the conservatives, in my judgment, we won the Cold War with political and economic communism, we've lost the cultural war with cultural Marxism, which I think has prevailed pretty much in the United States, or is now the dominant culture, whereas those of us who are traditionalists, we are, if you will, the counterculture.
What exactly is cultural Marxism, the dominant culture of today? How did the founders of communism figure out a way to take over our country, not with guns and weapons, but with values and ideas? One of his disciples, Antonio Gramsci, while, where else but in prison, wrote up a series of plans, now known as the Prison Notebooks. The workers of the world will unite only after the Long March is over. The Long March?
In other words, they had to get into the culture and change the way of people's thinking. And if people were thinking about patriotism and nation and God and country, that was a mechanism which was too resistant to Marxism. It could never take hold. So you had to erode and destroy that in the individuals. That began what's called the Long March through the institutions, through the seminaries, through the churches, through the media, through Hollywood, and all the rest of it, to create an anti-Christian culture which would destroy the Christian beliefs and convictions in the vast majority of the people, so they would embrace the ideas of Marxism, and they would embrace the ideas that they had rejected, and they would be open to a takeover, basically, by Marxists. Now, not political Marxists, but cultural Marxists.
So to get to that point, they said we have to destroy the culture, and what they were talking about was the Christian culture.
If you can break people away from religious affinities, for example, where they would turn to their community, their religious community, for support and help, or they would turn to Scripture for answers to certain perplexing questions. If they have an affinity to their religion, they might say, well, we're not going to go along with government because it's contrary to my religion. So cultural Marxism would attack religion of all kinds. Doesn't make any difference.
We, the people, will have thus been indoctrinated into seeing the wisdom of Marxism and the folly of capitalism. Thus, the door to socialism and communism will be open, and the door to a constitutional republic closed.
The Constitution is a set of principles. It's based ultimately on a moral code, because you go back to the Declaration of Independence. What was the basis for the Declaration of Independence? The law of nature and of nature's God, right? The ultimate moral code.
So how much of the media world does he control? Do they want to control? Own and control? All of it. Then he cited a special responsibility for the proper use of the means of social communication, which rests on journalists, writers, actors, designers, producers, exhibitors, distributors, operators, sellers, critics. So even that which you hear about that which is done by them will be done by them, so the critics will be either on this side or that side of the spectrum, using Hegelian dialectic to so confuse you that you don't know whether you're Arthur or Martha at the end of the day. The quality of the entertainment content was decreed in a section of Intermarifica encouraging the chronicling, the description, the representation of moral evil, which can, with the help of the means of social communication and with suitable dramatization, lead to a deeper knowledge and analysis of man and to manifestation of the true and the good in all their splendor. Here's the battle for the mind, good and evil. Now, what good and evil? Biblical, based, good and evil, or worldly based, good and evil, esoteric, good and evil? Well, let's continue. Emboldened by this papal decree, social communicators have been talking about free speech and all of the issues that are involved. Now, if we take cognizance of the fact that there are to own, control all the media, and to use it to instill mindsets in people, then I would like to know how this is achieved without anyone knowing how it's done.
How did cultural Marxism get into the United States? In 1923, members of the Marxist Communist Party set up an institute at Frankfurt University in Germany. This institute was named the Institute for Social Research. Later, it would become known as simply the Frankfurt School. These new Marxists, under the direction of Max Horkheimer.
After Marx, there were a group of Marxists who wisely decided that you could bring this collectivist society to a nation through culture as well, by introducing certain values and concepts that would break down the family, for example. If you could somehow break down the family unit so that it was no longer self-sustaining and no longer valued in a society, then that would leave individual members who formerly could turn to the family for support in times of need. They would now be cut loose.
And this is why I think the cultural Marxists have prevailed and are prevailing. They have captured the young. What was the saying in the Abby Hoffman? We're going to capture your children.
And the new generation of freedom-loving, authority-challenged baby boomers were quite willing to accept the bait and take a toke.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
Reich thus helped shape the minds of the American 60s youth with his runaway best-selling book, The Greening of America. Gramsci and Marx were now reaching their target audience, and the long march was in progress.
In the 1960s, the church pulled back from the culture. You had the first Sex and Satanism film. You had the first X-rated film where the pastor takes the boy up to his room in Broadway to get on his knees but not to pray. You had all of the perversion. You went from 100% broad audience films that anybody could see to 82% R-rated movies, which were restricted. So basically what happened, the church gave up in the mid-60s. It came up on prayer in schools. It gave up on being a force in society. And Johnson shackled the church when he said that when he used the 501c3 to say the churches couldn't talk about politics, and the church just buckled under. When prayer was taken out of school, the church buckled under. When the church collapsed from Hollywood, they buckled under. So it was the church's internal collapse, and that has happened before in history, and unless people get revival, reformation, renewal, we will never reclaim the culture.
Isn't that what the General Sun Tzu said? We have to achieve things without anyone knowing how it's done. And we must never, ever be the target. It's always good to use the enemy to do the work for you. And even if you represent the enemy, you will pretend that you are not the enemy, that someone else is the enemy, so that it's never you. There's always a front. I want to first give a little bit of background as to how the whole system has been set up. The Bible calls the devil the deceiver. So deception is his game, and he's had plenty of experience in it, and he's very good at it. Now, we know that the papal system has a militia, has an army, and they are run like an army, but they don't have the hardware. They use the weaponry and the hardware of nations in order to do what they have to do. But in order to do that, they must have control of those nations.
Did the world wars, revolutions, and big events of human history evolve naturally, or were they calculated and pre-planned? The answer to this puzzling question can be found within the boundaries of 3 of the world's most powerful cities. Those 3 cities belong to no nation and pay no taxes. They are Washington's District of Columbia, which is not part of the city of Washington or of the United States, the inner city of London, which is not part of London or England, and Vatican City, which is not part of Rome or Italy. Although geographically separate, the city-states of London, the Vatican, and the District of Columbia are one interlocking empire called Empire of the City. The flag of Washington's District of Columbia has 3 red stars, one for each city-state in the 3-city empire. This corporate empire of 3 city-states controls the world economically through London's inner city, militarily through the District of Columbia, and spiritually through the Vatican.
So let's see how these military orders operate, and the 2 that are, of course, particularly prominent are the Knights of Malta, which is the oldest military order in the Roman Catholic system. It existed before the Crusades. And then the Jesuits, which became the specialists overseeing the running of operations. And they received their marching orders when the crisis facing the Church of Rome was the greatest in their history. The Protestant world today does not believe what the Protestant world used to believe. The Protestant world today has incorporated the doctrines of Rome. They have discarded their doctrines in terms of the Antichrist, Daniel chapter 7, Revelation chapter 13, everything they stood for, everything they wrote, they have discarded. In the place thereof, they have adopted Jesuit doctrines. Now this should send alarm bells ringing throughout the world, and the evangelical world to a great degree has accepted dispensationalism, which is just an expansion of a Jesuit doctrine. It is to take the heat off the very target of the prophecies of the Bible. It doesn't seem as though Protestants get it. I don't think they get it. What started the Reformation? What was the trigger that started it? Indulgences. Indulgences. In Catholic thinking, when you have been forgiven your sins, then that's one thing. But you have not been relieved then of the punishment due to those sins. So this is what an indulgence is. And an indulgence is a grace handed to the church. And the Pope can take from the merit of Jesus Christ and all the saints that went before and apply that merit to those who don't deserve it because they have sinned grievously in their lives, and thereby give them relief from the punishment due. This gospel that is being preached by Roman Catholicism is not biblical. It is an affront to God. Another point we must stress is this. All this rich teaching is channeled in one direction, the service of mankind. A jubilee also entails the granting of indulgences. So there he goes, and grants an indulgence. This practice will acquire an even more important meaning in the Holy Year of Mercy. To gain an indulgence is to experience the holiness of the Church, who bestows upon all the fruits of Christ's redemption. Now there's the crux of the theology. Protestants, please take note. It is the church that administers the grace, not God. The job that has been assigned solely to Jesus Christ has been usurped, has been taken away, it has been given to others. And they have a broader ecumenism, as we see. There's an aspect of mercy that goes beyond the confines of the church. It relates us to Judaism and Islam, both of which consider mercy to be one of God's most important attributes. I trust that this Jubilee year, celebrating the mercy of God, will foster an encounter with these religions and with other noble religious traditions. Everybody must come together. May it open to us even more fervent dialogue so that we might know and understand another better. May it eliminate every form of closed-mindedness and disrespect, and drive out every form of violence and discrimination. Now please remember that he already stated that if you criticize another religion, that's an act of violence, even if you harm no one, even if you hurt no one. My thoughts now turn to the Mother of Mercy. May the sweetness of her countenance watch over us, etc., etc. Beautiful words about her. Our prayer also extends to the saints. And the blessed ones who made divine mercy their mission in life. May she who was called to enter the depth of divine mercy intercede for us. The Bible says there is one advocate, one intercessor between man and God, and that is Christ Jesus. He comes to some startling conclusions concerning the future of Islam. In his chapter entitled Mary and the Muslims, he says, at the present time, the hatred of the Muslim countries against the West is becoming a hatred against Christianity itself. Interesting. Although the statesmen have not yet taken it into account, there is still grave danger that the temporal power of Islam may return, and with it the menace that it may shake off a West that has ceased to be Christian and affirm itself as a great anti-Christian world power. Are there such moves in the world today? Now, I just have a very devious mind, suspicious mind. What if you control history in any case? Can you not bring this about? Can you not achieve this through your machinations and manipulations? Is this not possible? It's not difficult if you have all power in your hand to predict what you're going to do next. However, then he says, it is our firm belief that the fears some entertain concerning the Muslims are not realized, but that Islam instead will eventually be converted to Christianity. Because I've made some statements regarding this issue in the past, and Islam has the same veneration for Mary as has Catholicism. Islam teaches that she is immaculate. Islam teaches she will be the highest woman in heaven. And why did the Roman Catholic Church say that the Quran is very, very similar to the Gospel of Mary, which is an apocryphal book? And in a way that even some of our missionaries never suspected. it is our belief that this will happen not through the direct teaching of Christianity, but through a summoning of the Muslims to a veneration of the Mother of God. The Bible says the mark of the beast will be implemented, and then there will be no buying and selling. Then there will be a death decree, and then the close of probation will come, and you will only know that it has come because the plagues will start falling. That's what the Bible says. Now I get letters from all over the world, but the plagues have started to fall. Excuse me, there might be drops, but how can the plagues start falling if the prophetic events are not in place? We have a more sure word of prophecy.
As Hudson Institute scholar John Fonte wrote, Max Horkheimer and Gromsky believe that there are no absolute moral standards that are universally true for all human beings outside a particular historical context. In other words, to the Frankfurt School, values come from society or the state collective.
Collectivism implies that if something is important enough, then the state should step in and make sure that everybody conforms, whether they want to or not. So the essence of collectivism in a political sense is that it employs the use of coercion to require people to work together. And once coercion enters, then you are actually participating in a negative social conduct, which is in many cases worse than the social condition that you're trying to overcome by the collective action. People are not given free will.
Not to be outdone by Karl Marx, a brilliant mind or two at the Frankfurt School soon came up with several of their own ideas, the foremost known as critical theory. The idea behind critical theory is to challenge all previously accepted standards in every aspect of life from a Marxist perspective. Standards such as Abe Lincoln was honest, home is where the heart is, democracy and capitalism are good, the founders believed in freedom. In doing this, every negative thing one could possibly say about America was dredged up.
They did have a problem, which was that although slavery was technically legal throughout all the colonies, only some of the colonies really had slave-based economies. Southern states, Maryland, South, essentially. And therefore, they had to deal with the practical problem of how could you integrate these states with the northern and middle colonies, middle states and northern states. You know, the first principle in the preamble is to create a more perfect union. That was their first goal.
But when the consciousness-challenged baby boomers repeatedly heard that the establishment, as they came to refer to it, was a bunch of racist, overly religious, sexually deprived sexists who were xenophobic Indian killers and anti-Semites, they internalized the criticisms. Soon their movies and songs began to reflect these values, spreading them throughout the nation's youth culture. The reality-challenged baby boomers of the 1960s were the most free, most affluent, and most privileged of any youth in any age. They were bored with their lives and swallowed the Frankfurt School's propaganda like a hit of California Sunshine.
So let's look at the confrontation that we're heading for, and let's get some background so that we get our focus right again. Where is the enemy? It's very important to know where is the enemy. Isn't that correct? We must understand the enemy. We must understand how he thinks. Otherwise, we can get confused in all these side issues. So let's go back to basics. What the seal of the United States of America represents to anyone who takes it seriously is a ministry of sin. A speech by the Jesuit political scientist Michael Novak, published in 1989 in the issue America, which is the official Jesuit magazine, sums it up eloquently enough. The framers wanted to build a novus ordo that would secure liberty and justice for all. Now listen carefully. The underlying principle of this new order is the fact of human sin. To build a republic designed for sinners, then is the indispensable task. Now, we get very upset when legislation is passed that seems to favor sin, and then even goes so far as to glorify sin. Isn't that so? And if we look at legislation that was passed in the United States and what is happening in the world, all over the world, the same thing is happening. The legislation regarding to gay rights and all of these issues is not an American issue. It started long ago. It's a world issue. No, it's the Zionists who are in control, the bankers, the money men, and the Rothschilds, and all of these. They're in control. Have you heard of all of those things? Now, here's an interesting one from the Jewish Encyclopedia. The 1906 Jewish Encyclopedia described the Rothschilds as the guardians of the papal treasure. Now, this word Rothschild is, of course, a total mispronunciation. It's a German word, and it means Rothschild, and Rot is red, and Schild is a shield. Now, who were the ones who wore red shields in war? Was the Roman army. The Roman army marched with red shields. So this is the Roman army. These are front Jews. They're not Jews. So they are people in disguise.
Treaty as protecting Catholic rights in Germany. However, by this action, the Vatican helps legitimize the Third Reich in the eyes of the German Catholic hierarchy and laymen, as well as of the international community. And you can see all the other puppets out there saluting the Roman salute to Hitler, and Hitler is meeting his Bishop of the Reich right here, Bishop Mueller. This is a photograph of Germany signing a concordant with the Vatican in Rome on July 20th, 1933. That started the Third Reich. See on page 68, the Catholic priest here is given all those souls wish not to be killed the option of either being baptized into the Catholic Church or being put to death. And here you see him baptizing those who do not want to be killed, so they will swear an allegiance to the Pope and Rome. Interesting to note, back in 1776, Adam Weishaupt, who founded the Illuminati, was a Jesuit at the Jesuit University in Germany. And what happened was he was Jewish, and they call them crypto-Jews. Whenever a Jew swears his allegiance to Rome and gets baptized into Rome, if you look up that word crypto-Jew, it tells you that's what the definition means, a Jew that swears an allegiance to Rome. It's interesting that the Illuminati, they made sure that they blamed the Jews for everything. That was part of their great secret. Where did the word Holocaust derive from? Well, let's see here. In the Catholic Bible, this is what it says in Numbers chapter 29. And ye shall offer a holocaust. And if you look at the King James Version or any other Bible translation version, they all say, and ye shall offer a burnt offering. As we look at Norm William Davis Jr., he points out that studying together, him and his Catholic friend, we found that the word Holocaust was used more than 150 times in the Catholic Bible, but never once in the King James or any other Bible translation.
This is what they are. Now, where is Rome leading us to? We have to look at Rome, because the Bible says, if I look at Revelation chapter 13, there are two players at the end of time. It's the beast out of the sea, and it's the beast out of the earth. Those two. Now, all the reformers agreed that the beast out of the sea is the papal system. And it had all the components of all the kingdoms prior to it, incorporated in it. It spoke like with the mouth of a lion. Its religion is Babylonian. It has father, mother, child, just like the Babylonian religion. Its body was Greek, but before we get to the Greek part, his feet were bare feet, so they were Medo-Persian. So it stood on Medo-Persian feet, which means its system whereby it is organized, on which it stands, is Medo-Persian. It's Mitraism. The whole Roman system is based on Mithraism, the way it is divided into groups like Dominicans and etc., or Jesuits or whatever. That is Mithraism. And then its body, the bulk of it, its philosophy, is Greek. Its legal system by which it rules, because there are crowns on it, is Roman. And the second beast, according to the reformers, was still future. And Wesley wrote just before its appearance, it cannot be far off, is the United States of America. So those are the two that we are watching. And the two are working together according to Scripture. And the one is doing on behalf of the other what the first one will, well, have as its criteria of worship. Isn't that correct? And then the mark of the beast will be introduced. And the whole world wandered after the beast with an O, which means it had the mindset of the beast. Didn't walk after it. It's not with an A, it's with an O. Wandered, thought like the beast. All the world religions, Hindus, Buddhists, Sikh, Baha'i, Islam, Jewish, Catholic, Anglican, signing that they have one and the same God, the one that we see in the rain and in the environment. This is the pantheistic God that they have been preaching in the United Nations for eons. So they've come together. Who's missing from the signing ceremony? The hardcore Protestants. The evangelicals are missing. The Lutherans are not there. Now, the final enemy to be overcome must be the Protestant world. And this is what the Bible tells us. Ezekiel says, destruction cometh, and they shall seek peace. They signed the world unity of religious agreement, while downstairs the politicians signed for the cessation of all war. So it was the religious world and the political world signing simultaneously for the sake of peace. And there shall be none. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. So this is the sign that the Lord is wanting us to look out for. Where are we heading? And when comes this final confrontation between true Protestantism and this Babylonian religious conglomerate? And where's it going to strike? It's going to strike not the Sikh world. It's not going to strike the Buddhist world. The confrontation is going to be with Malta. Fundamentalism. A form, or in America, a form of Protestantism that arose in the early part of the 20th century in reaction to modernism and stresses the infallibility of the Bible, not only in matters of faith and morals, but also as a literal historical record, holding as essential to Christian faith beliefs in such doctrines as the creation of the world, the virgin birth, physical resurrection, atonement by the sacrificial death of Christ, and the second coming. So if you believe in any of those or all of those, you're a fundamentalist. This was an interesting thing that happened in Germany. A Lutheran pastor, after this great debate about fundamentalism and what they should believe, the Lutherans, and what they shouldn't believe, finally got the courage and stood up and said he's sick and tired of this nonsense that is being preached out there. And he said some harsh things. He could have perhaps said it in a better way. He said, Buddha is nothing but a fat little man. And he said, Catholic relics are rubbish. And he says, all Muslims are sinners. But there's only one Savior, and that is Jesus Christ. He said we must get back to believing what we as Lutherans believe. Do you think that he got great support or great opposition from his church? This is to me fascinating. Because this is going to be the issue.
Als einer unserer Reporter vergangene Woche der Redaktion die Predigt eines Pastors vorgespielt hat, da waren viele von uns sprachlos. Nachdem wir darüber berichtet haben, wurde es Gesprächsthema in Bremen bis heute. Pastor Olaf Latzel von der St. Martini-Gemeinde hat von der Reinheit des Glaubens gesprochen. Buddha bezeichnete er als fetten alten Herren, katholische Reliquien seien Dreck und Muslime Sünder. Danach gab es heftige Kritik am Pastor und gestern schließlich meldete die bremische evangelische Kirche, dass Olaf Latzel sich entschuldigt. Die Pastorenkollegen hatten trotzdem zu einer gemeinsamen Aktion aufgerufen. Sie wollen sich distanzieren. Sebastian Manz.
A fascinating debate. We will not tolerate fundamentalists. The hatred that is growing against fundamentalism is tangible. And it's fascinating to see that the two camps are beginning to form, because thousands of people aligned themselves with the sermon of Olaf and said, this is where you need to go. Jesus needs to come back into the center. And immediately they linked them to extremists with extreme political views. They are very clever in how they use the media. The confrontation that is coming is between Christian fundamentalism and Malta, the military arm of the beast.
But there appears to be a growing contest between authoritarianism and liberalism right now. And I want everybody to understand, I am not neutral in that contest. I believe in a liberal political order. I know that some countries which now recognize the power of free markets still reject the model of free societies. Perhaps those of us who have been promoting democracy feel somewhat discouraged since the end of the Cold War, because we've learned that liberal democracy will not just wash across the globe in a single wave. It turns out building accountable institutions is hard work, the work of generations. The gains are often fragile. Sometimes we take one step forward and then two steps back. In countries held together by borders drawn by colonial powers, with ethnic enclaves and tribal divisions, politics and elections can sometimes appear to be a zero-sum game. But I believe this thinking is wrong. I believe the road of true democracy remains the better path. Young people need a global education in order to thrive. Independent media needs to check the abuses of power. And history shows that strong men are then left with two paths: permanent crackdown, which sparks strife at home, or scapegoating enemies abroad, which can lead to war. Now, I will admit, my belief that governments serve the individual and not the other way around is shaped by America's story. Our nation began with a promise of freedom that applied only to the few, but because of our democratic constitution, because of our Bill of Rights, because of our ideals, ordinary people were able to organize and march and protest, and ultimately those ideals won out. So yes, my views are shaped by the specific experiences of America, but I do not think this story is unique to America. So those of us who believe in democracy, we need to speak out forcefully, because both the facts and history, I believe, are on our side. Moreover, every country will organize its government informed by centuries of history and the circumstances of geography and the deeply held beliefs of its people. I recognize a traditional society may value unity and cohesion more than a diverse country like my own, which was founded upon what at the time was a radical idea, the idea of the liberty of individual human beings, endowed with certain God-given rights. But that does not mean that ordinary people in Asia or Africa or the Middle East somehow prefer arbitrary rule that denies them a voice in the decisions that can shape their lives. I believe that spirit is universal. And if any of you doubt the universality of that desire, listen to the voices of young people everywhere who call out for freedom and dignity and the opportunity to control their own lives. This leads me to the third thing we need to do. We must reject any forms of fundamentalism or racism or a belief in ethnic superiority that makes our traditional identities irreconcilable with modernity. Instead, we need to embrace the tolerance that results from respect of all human beings. That's a truism that global integration has led to a collision of cultures. Trade, migration, the internet, all these things can challenge and unsettle our most cherished identities. And we must respect the meaning that people draw from their own traditions, from their religion, from their ethnicity, from their sense of nationhood. But I do not believe progress is possible if our desire to preserve our identities gives way to an impulse to dehumanize or dominate another group.
As individuals have rights, and we grant the government privileges. Those privileges are listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and anytime we have a justifiable reason and the courage to do so, we can revoke those rights and take those privileges away from the government.
The world is too small. We are too packed together for us to be able to resort to those old ways of thinking. The mindset of sectarianism.
Secularism has really achieved dominance in the academic community and the intellectual community, but not the nation as a whole. However, it is much stronger than it was, and so this is the basis of the great cultural war we're undergoing right now. And this militant, it is an anti-Christian, anti-God, anti-traditionalist revolution. It's partly
an extremism and bloodletting and retribution that has been taking place will not be quickly reversed. And if we are honest, we understand that no external power is going to be able to force different religious communities or ethnic communities to coexist for long. But I do believe we have to be honest about the nature of these conflicts. And our international community must continue to work with those who seek to build rather than to destroy. And there is a military component to that. It means being united and relentless in destroying networks like ISIL, which show no respect for human life. It also means that in a place like Syria, where there is no ultimate military victory to be won, we're going to have to pursue the hard work of diplomacy that aims to stop the violence and deliver aid to those in need and support those who pursue a political settlement.
In a letter dated 22 January 1870, Mazzini wrote to Pike. Now, Albert Pike is this high mason who wrote the manual, if you like, of Scottish Freemasonry. He said the following: "We must allow all of the federations to continue just as they are. It must appear as things are as they were in the beginning, with their systems, their central authorities, and diverse modes of correspondence between high grades of the same right, organized as they are at present, but we must create a super right, which will remain unknown, to which we will call those Masons of high degree, whom we shall select. With regard to our brothers in Masonry, these men must be pledged to the strictest secrecy. Through this supreme right, we will govern all Freemasonry, which will become the one international center, the more powerful because its direction will be unknown." Now, Albert Pike wrote a letter to Mazzini, and that was dated August 15, 1871, in which he propagated that there should be a world order, a one order where all nations are under the control of one central organization. And in order to achieve this, they planned, and there are numerous quotes for this, so I've put a number on the screen because some will say, I don't trust this, I don't trust that, I don't trust the other. Here are references down there, there are references up there, there will be references in other slides, so it comes from different sources. He said, and this was, by the way, on display in the British Museum and could be seen there until it was taken away. The First World War, to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia, protector of orthodoxy, and bring about an atheistic communistic state. Did that happen? Yes. Now that was written long before this event. Long before this event. This was written in 1871, but this war broke out in 1914. The Second World War, that's also written long before the event, to originate between Great Britain and Germany, to strengthen communism as antithesis to the Judeo-Christian culture, and bring about a Zionist state in Israel. Did it achieve this objective? Yes. In fact, after this war, Israel, in its present form, was reinstated under the protection of Britain. And then, interestingly enough, a Third World War, a Middle Eastern war involving Judaism and Islam and spreading internationally. That's fascinating. Is that on the cards, or what do you think? Certainly sounds like we are on track. Well, here's another quote, just in case people don't like that quote. Mazzini with Pike developed a plan for 3 world wars so that eventually every nation would be willing to surrender its national sovereignty to a world government. The first war was to end the Tsarist regime in Russia, the second to allow the Soviet Union to control Europe, the Third World War was to be in the Middle East between Muslim and Jews and would result in Armageddon. Interesting. Now, how were they going to do it? Let's read what Albert Pike wrote about these wars and how they were going to be unleashed. He wrote, quote, "We shall unleash the nihilist and the atheist," so the destroyer and the atheist, "and we will provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism. Origin of savagery and the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the minority of revolutionaries will exterminate these destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, will receive the pure light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer. The destruction of Christianity and atheism both conquered and exterminated at the same time." Wow, what a clever plan. So you rub the two systems which you create up against the other. You create atheism as an antithesis to the Judeo-Christian culture. You have these two clash until they rub each other up, and then out of that you will get a new world order where you have a new religion which is far more esoteric and actually honors Satan. Isn't that a rather clever plan? Well, it's very successful. That is why Ordo ab Cao is the verse, if you like, that Freemasonry uses. This is one of their documents, remember, that I photographed in a Masonic lodge.
And can see those who are not like themselves as worthy of dignity and respect. Across the region's conflicts, we have to insist that all parties recognize a common humanity and that nations end proxy wars that fuel disorder. Because until basic questions are answered about how communities coexist, The embers of extremism will continue to burn. Countless human beings will suffer, most of all in that region. But extremism will continue to be exported overseas.
Thanks for watching. So, as you can see, there's obviously a lot of variables going on here, you know, to how this entire picture has really developed into what it is. You know, obviously, the world needs our conscious participation. Money is the grease to the knees, you know. So, obviously, we need to start really focusing on the basics. And one thing I'm going to make clear right now is this right here. Choose your side now, because obviously there is one. You have the Protestant mindset, which is not, this is more just a label, a word in itself to describe an individual that protests against apostasy, protests against false doctrine, protests against certain things that will inevitably be like a seed that hatches and then contaminates other minds in the world. Well, Protestantism has obviously died in the churches today, if you noticed. And then the world has more or less taken on a mindset that whatever has happened in the past, it must be myth. It doesn't even matter anymore because it's the past. And we're now here in the future. So, we're allowing what has happened in the past to grow. And they still have the same beef with us. The same beef with freedom and one's own conscience to be able to dictate itself. They don't want you to know the secrets of the world. They don't want you to be able to make a real, true, logical, intellectual assumption of what's going on. Fundamentalism, I hate to break it to you, is what brought this about. The Constitution of the United States of America. And you may not believe that, but it's the truth. Because if you read the Citizen's Handbook, or Rule Book, it actually says it right inside here about the rule of law and how it really works. Okay? There are a few ways out of bondage. Bloodshed and war often result. But our founding fathers learned a better way, realizing that a creator is always above the greater, and greater than that which he creates. They established a 3-vote system by an informed citizenry and can control those acting in the name of government. Well, as you notice, we've been perverted and been told that we only have 2. So, to be a good master, you must always remember the true pecking order, or chain of command in this nation. God created man with unalienable rights. And it's the 10 commandments that we must follow. That's the law of God. And also the last and final one, which is the belief and faith in Jesus Christ, and that he is the Son of God, came down, died for our sins, to be forgiven and washed away, and so we can go into heaven and be connected to God. Because there is no other way. All right? You see this right here? It's my friend, Trevor Camden. But that's what you would believe, right? That this is my friend, a little box of ashes. But see, it's just a box of ashes. It's got a little plaque on it. This ain't Trevor. Trevor's gone, okay? This don't represent Trevor. This is not his image. This right here is something when I was a child and was young and my friend took his life, I thought, hey, let me have some ashes. And then that way it's like I have my friend with me. But he's not. It's just a box with no life, no spirit, nothing in it. This is the example that Israelites and other religions were worshiping, and they were doing the same thing that I'm talking about right now. And God was looking down being like, why? Why don't you acknowledge me and my word and what I've done for you? You know, and then he realized, he knew that we needed something to worship. Something that could understand us, love us, show the compassion and grace that is within him, that he saw that we needed, that we were trying to portray out of other things and getting other people to worship too and believe. See? It's the mind. So God sent Jesus as a living, breathing man to come and share all the same experiences that we did. And then say, hey, you know what? Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. And then he was pierced and bled on the soil with water mixed with his blood. And then they put him, so on a Friday, it's like he was preparing for Sabbath, went into a tomb on the Sabbath day, and then he left the tomb. He left the tomb. He resurrected from the dead, okay, and then told his disciples shown himself to them again one last final time and told them what to do and let them know that, hey, my spirit will now be spread across the entire world for anybody that believes and wants to know the Father, the Creator of God, will know me. And I am the Son of God. I am the Word. I was with God when it all was created, because I'm the voice and the Word of God. I am the Spirit of truth. I come. This is what he said. This is what he did. And he told everybody, spread the gospel so that people that believe will call on my name, and those that find the Spirit of truth and God and the Holy Spirit and read the Word of God, they will be saved. And then you shall be baptized in new water to be reborn as a new soul into this earth, so that God's Spirit can come into you. And you have to call on the Spirit and really truly ask him to come into you. And once you do, I'm telling you, you're going to see some changes. Man, that's you, created the Constitution. And the Constitution itself is what created government. And then government created corporations, contracts, etc. So think about that. Who's in control here? And are you the corporate you, or are you the living you? Like I said, there's a line drawn in the sand here. I know not everybody's willing to accept what they've seen and the truth of the matter. And it goes deeper. Okay, I was going to dig up a video of this doctor. He's a Japanese doctor who prayed in the water. Look it up. Okay? And then he also subjected himself to screaming hate and feeling the emotion, and then exerting himself of that into the water, breathing these hateful words into the water. And go look at the results of seeing what happens just by the mechanism of voice and intent behind your voice and words that we operate with. I am not an individual that's trying to claim hierarchy in this world over another man. I'm nothing righteous, okay? I know what I am, and that's the difference. I'm willing to see the other side of the coin, okay? The question is are you? You might like what you've seen and what has been put together. You might not. You might judge me because of it, and others that actually relate. The question you need to ask yourself is, why? Whose ideas am I following, and where did these ideas come from, so that I was so convinced to attack another person based off their own beliefs? Thank you for tuning in. SSN Right for coverage covering the rise of the Fourth Reich.